Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. I've been dying to talk about this, but because of my schedule, I couldn't get around to talking about it, but here I am right now. So we watched the last presidential debate, and I want to tell you what I thought about it. The candidates talked about very important issues. They talked about abortion, they talked about immigration, they talked about foreign policy, they talked about the Supreme Court, gun control, and other important topics. But the next day, instead of focusing on those very important issues, the news media decided to focus on nonsense. The news media decided to focus on the fact that Donald Trump referred to Hillary Clinton as a nasty woman. They wanted to focus on that as if that is significant. They wanted to focus on the fact that Donald Trump would not acknowledge that he would accept the election results. They found that to be more important than all the substantive things that those two candidates talked about for over an hour. And to me, that tells you everything you need to know about the media. The media does not care about issues. The media is not there to educate you or to enlighten you. The media is not there to talk about substance. The media is all about sensationalism. It's all about things that sell and things that will get a lot of attention, things that will help them earn more and more advertising dollars. That's what the media is about. And the media obviously and clearly is not objective. We see that. There was a time when the media would at least pretend to be objective, but nowadays the media is so heavily biased, the media is so in favor of Hillary Clinton that it's ridiculous. And people who understand about my channel, who know my channel, they know that I don't support either one of these candidates. I don't have a dog in the fight, but it's clear and obvious that this media is heavily biased in favor of Hillary Clinton. She is their candidate. They want her to be elected. So they have done everything in their power to make sure that that happens. The past couple of debates before the last debate, you had moderators who were obviously leaning towards one candidate versus the other candidate. And that showed by the nature of the questions that were asked. Like in the first debate, they spent all this time talking about foolishness, all this time talking about these videotapes and these other issues that really have very little to do with the substance, very little to do with the actual issues that are important in this election. But that's what they wanted to focus on. But this debate was different because you had a more conservative moderator. Um, and I'm sad to say, I mean, this moderator is one of the moderators for Fox. I mean, he's one of the people that hosts Fox News programs and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, I don't support Fox News, but we had a more substantive debate in this last debate than we've had in all these other debates. And I thought that that was significant. Now, I just want to briefly talk about the things that the media focused on. They focused on him calling her a nasty woman. First of all, she is a nasty woman. Anybody who's observed this woman knows this. This is not new information. People who have interacted with her would agree with that. If you saw how Hillary Clinton responded to those Black Lives Matter protesters, it's obvious that this woman is nasty. Now, what people like her are trying to do is they're trying to put on this banner of feminism, this banner of being all about women's rights to protect and insulate this woman. And I think that's a damn shame. I mean, calling this woman a nasty woman is just a fact. It's just a fact. So why was that so controversial? And then this other issue about Donald Trump and the elections. Donald Trump blew it when he was asked that question. He simply blew it. And now instead of them talking about his responses, instead of them talking about his performance, they're spending all this time talking about that one comment. All Donald Trump had to say is that he would accept the election, assuming that there were no violations of the law. That's all that he had to to say. Because that way he would cover himself. He would still leave an opening for legal challenges if necessary. So now, because of his stumbling and bumbling over that question, now everybody's talking about how he's broken away from precedent of the past where candidates just uniformly accepted the results of the election. And one thing that's real important about that issue is this. Like on the campaign trail, this guy has been talking about how it's a rigged election and all this and that, suggesting that people are going to commit voter fraud and calling for people to challenge voters at the polls and to be monitors and all that kind of stuff. All of that is significant because it promotes a toxic environment and it encourages these right-wing idiots and these outright racists to harass people, to intimidate voters, to challenge voters at the polls, to create a chaotic environment. And that's problematic, and it's real problematic because some of Trump's supporters have actually called for revolution if this man doesn't get elected. They've called for this. A lot of these rank and file members, these backwoods redneck idiots, have been calling for this stuff. But these are the people that follow Trump. You got these racist people, these Klansmen, these Nazis, these so-called white nationalists, which is just a polite term for white supremacists. These are the people that support this guy. And they're calling for revolution, some of them, some of the extreme elements of his base. So this is a very important issue, this issue of him constantly going on the campaign trail talking about a rigged election. This man constantly plays the role of victim. Even though he's one of the wealthiest people in this country, he has all this influence, but yet he wants to whine and cry and play the role of victim. That's a disgrace, and it tells you everything about his character. This is a man who can't take responsibility for anything. This is a man whose ego is inflated out of control. He's a narcissist. It's a shame. It really is. So I just want to go back to some of the issues that they talked about. They talked about the Supreme Court. And during that discussion, I noticed something that was lacking in that discussion. Here you have Donald Trump pretending like he wants to court the African American voters, that he wants support from African American voters. He's been to all these black churches with all these Uncle Tom pastors and sellouts, trying to present this image that he cares about black people. But when the subject of the Supreme Court and the important issues before that court came up, this man didn't mention not a damn thing about the African American. He didn't talk about affirmative action. He didn't talk about any of those things. He didn't talk about voting rights. And the same is true for Hillary Rodden stinking ass Clinton. She didn't talk about none of that stuff either. While she campaigned during the primaries, running around using the so-called mothers of the movement as political footballs to advance in the election during the primaries against Bernie Sanders. She used them as footballs to make it seem as if she was so concerned about your issues, about the black people, but she couldn't care less. During that debate, she talked about how the Supreme Court is important with respect to issues of women and gay people and all that kind of stuff. But she didn't say not a damn thing about your black ass. She didn't say nothing about voting rights. She didn't say nothing about affirmative action. She didn't say nothing about African American people. And that speaks volumes for me. And I was watching Yvette Carnell the other day on her YouTube channel talk about the Clintons, and they talk about some of the emails that have been exposed. Emails basically saying that one of their tactics to win African American voters was to appoint token black people to certain positions to make it appear as if she's so supportive of black people's issues. That's how they play us out. I mean, the emails have already been exposed of the Democratic Party saying that they're not going to embrace any of the issues of or policy positions of Black Lives Matter, but they'll have window dressing where they'll meet with a select few Black Lives Matter leaders to make it appear as if they're concerned about Black Lives Matters and black issues and police brutality. But at the end of the day, they weren't going to embrace any of the policy positions of Black Lives Matter. That tells you the attitude of that party towards the black man and woman. That tells you how they regard black people. On those emails, they refer to Latinos as needy Latinos. And you had a Latino official in Hillary Clinton's campaign to refer to minorities as a firewall and talk about how they could paint Bernie Sanders as someone who doesn't relate to minority voters, as someone who only has the support of white liberals. So all that stuff tells you the mentality of the Democratic Party. It tells you about how they operate. It tells you that you're at the bottom of their list of priorities, but yet you put them at the top of yours. And that's a damn shame. So I thought that that was important to discuss. In this issue of immigration, they had a great debate about immigration. And overall, I think that Donald Trump performed the best during this debate as opposed to the other debates. He wasn't going to go into detail like Hillary Clinton. Obviously, she knows more about policy. She knows more about the issues as a policymaker for years upon years. So there would be no competition in the area of substance. But I think that Donald Trump held his own during the debate for the most part until he allowed himself to get baited into becoming unhinged and losing it. I think that Donald Trump's biggest problem is probably for most of his life, he's been surrounded by a whole bunch of yes men, people who basically cater to his ego, people who don't challenge him. So he's not equipped to deal with confrontation. He doesn't know how to deal with a debate. He doesn't deal well with people challenging his ideas. He doesn't have the appropriate presidential temperament. And I think that if he was more disciplined, he could have done much better during these debates, but he allowed himself to be baited into getting off topic, off message, and sidetracked. And for the most part during this debate, he maintained his composure for a good portion of it, but then he reverted back to who he is, a temperamental, narcissistic person. One thing that I thought that was good during this debate was the discussion about the Clinton Foundation. I thought that that was a great discussion, that they had a great exchange, because here you have Hillary Clinton presenting herself as some kind of humanitarian and all that kind of stuff. Like she's such a great person. She's so pro women's rights and all this stuff. But yet her Clinton Foundation accepts all these donations from all these dictatorships that don't care anything about women's rights. Not a damn thing about women's rights. Like Saudi Arabia, a country that is one of the most repressive, oppressive, and backwards and medieval countries on the face of the earth, where women can't even drive, where they not only have the death penalty, where they behead people, they engage in all kinds of backwards and Stone Age type of conduct. They persecute homosexuals. I mean, they torture them and stuff like that. I mean, I don't support, the homosexual lifestyle or anything, but that country, when it comes to human rights, their record is abysmal. But yet this is a country that she has no problem accepting donations from. And there's a lot of significant issues about pay to play, how she used the Clinton Foundation to trade influence for dollars and all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, there's a lot of stuff around that. And I thought that it was great that they had a discussion about that during the debate. And also the issue of emails came up. The issue of emails with respect to immigration issues, how Hillary Clinton advocated open borders. And I think they should have asked her about other things that were contained in her emails, but they focused on that immigration issue and how she advocated for open borders in one of her Wall Street speeches. Um, so they questioned her about that. But instead of addressing the substance of those emails, this woman went on some deflection, talking about the Russians and all that kind of stuff, talking about um, Donald Trump's relationship with Putin, the president of Russia, getting into a discussion about that, about his loyalty to America and all this, instead of focusing on the substance of those emails. And that's the tactic that the Clintons have been using throughout this election. Ever since these WikiLeaks emails have been exposed, they have been deflecting and avoiding and just outright ignoring questions on those issues. Those emails are so damaging. If it wasn't for that ridiculous tape of Donald Trump speaking vulgarities and obscenities, Hillary Clinton's campaign would be done by now. With all these emails that have been exposed, exposing her as a puppet of Wall Street, exposing her as a two-faced political chameleon who changes with her environment, exposing her and her campaign as a campaign that pretends to support minorities but really couldn't care less about minorities. So yeah, she would be done if it wasn't for her friends in the media, if it wasn't for Donald Trump and his buffoonery and stupidity. She would be toast by now. But instead, she has effectively deflected and had people talking about the Russians and talking about Donald Trump's loyalty to the country when really those are not even the issues. That's not even really what it's all about. But that's what we have right now. People want to talk about Russians, but they don't want to talk about those emails. So yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that I got out of this debate. And also one of the very important issues that was discussed was the issue of foreign policy, the situation in Syria and Iraq. I thought that Donald Trump made some great points about how that whole debacle over there was exacerbated by the actions of the Clintons, of Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State, and of Barack Obama and his policy over there. I mean, I would go on to say this. I mean, we would not be in this situation today if it wasn't for George W. Bush and his decision to invade Iraq. That was one of the most ridiculous and outrageous and stupid decisions that has been made in a long time. It cost many lives, both American lives and Iraqi lives. It cost the United States billions upon billions of dollars. And it was supposed to, quote unquote, bring democracy and all this and all that to the Middle East. But what do you have? Nothing but more chaos. What you have is a vacuum in power that is being filled by some of the most extreme and backwards regimes on the face of the earth. You have ISIS, one of the most repressive groups in the world. A group that crucifies people, beheads people. A terrorist organization that has no regard for human life. That organization is the birth of, it came from American foreign policy over there. And then you have the United States and its failed policy in Libya, by overthrowing Gaddafi. They have created a vacuum over there. And now you have ISIS in a position of power in that region of the world. You don't have democracy over there. You have chaos. And this is the foreign policy that Hillary Clinton helped form. Hillary Clinton actually advocates even more intervention than Obama does. This woman wants to create a no-fly zone in Syria, and that would be a disaster. That would entrench the United States in that region. It would eventually lead to another war in Syria. Because the moment the Syrians shoot down an American craft, then there would be military intervention escalated at that point. You would probably have ground troops, probably have more airplanes and more bombings taking place over there. And what happens if, during this no-fly zone, what happens if they shoot down a Russian jet or something like that? Then we're looking at a larger conflict between the United States and Russia, two nuclear powers, two great powers. That could be a disaster. But that's what you face under Hillary Clinton. That's what you face. And I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump would impose the same type of no-fly zone as well. But instead of talking about that kind of important issue, they've spent all this time talking about nonsense after the debates. So those are my thoughts. Overall, I think that this was Donald Trump's best performance. I think that you had the best moderator out of all the debates because he was more objective. He was more challenging for Hillary Clinton because all these other moderators basically are rooting and supporting Hillary Clinton. So they were hands off and they were easy on her during those other two debates. So yeah, those are my thoughts about that. And also I want to mention one other thing. I came across an article that basically talked about how the Clinton administration wanted to face somebody like Donald Trump. In fact, they tried to make Donald Trump and other far-right candidates appear to be legitimate candidates. They kind of propped them up so that they could set up a situation like this, where you have Hillary Clinton campaigning against a damn buffoon who will probably more likely than not lose by a substantial margin in the election. So they wanted to create a situation where they get to pick who the opponent is, make sure that that opponent is weak like Donald Trump so that they can win the general election. I will post links to all the articles and information that I rely on for this video as usual.